The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Independent Investigation of Reality.
Good morning, everyone. It's Wade Franson. I'm in the studio with a returning guest, Mehrtash Olson. I first learned of Mehrtash when he wrote a paper in the heat of the COVID situation, in which he asked certain questions and shared certain data and information that questioned some of the overall approach back when it was not fit and right to do so, to question anything. That immediately gave him a high degree of credibility in my eyes for this Bahá'í principle, which is the independent investigation of reality. Mehrtash and I are both Baha'is. This show is airing Sunday morning on a number of channels, including the Bahá'í Clearwater channel. And in the Bahá'í community, there is no clergy. We do respect government. We do respect institutions. We have a lot of respect for higher institutions, for those who are working together for global unity, global policy, participation in the United Nations and high-level non-government organizations and organizations like the World Health Organization. One of the first people that I met when I was being introduced to the Baha'i community out in California was a gentleman who works for the World Health Organization. And in I think, epidemiology and its application in foreign countries and so on and so forth. But at the bedrock of the Baha'i faith is this principle of independent investigation of reality. And on the subject of vaccines, climate change, other sort of modern big science topics, the Baha'i faith and its institutions defer to science and ask that we independently investigate and make decisions based on those whom we trust within those establishment, trusted sources. Therein is the rub. Different ones of us have different perspectives and might trust different experts, might trust different research disciplines, might trust those pursuing the answer to one hypothesis and trust a little bit less somebody who has a different vantage point and is pursuing a different hypothesis. Increasingly, we're all becoming aware of something called the medical industrial complex and becoming aware of bias that is inherent through incentive structures, right? The phrase that comes to mind in my mind was, they told me to follow the science, I followed the money, and that's where I found the science. So science is an emerging discipline. It's still relatively in its infancy, and we all have to participate in it. We're all part of it, and we all have to independently investigate. So I immediately had respect for Mehrtash and have been very pleased to have been able to form a friendship and a professional association with him, and to be doing this now third installment of the discussion of the independent investigation of the reality. I thought I would just give that little background for everybody to introduce you, Mehrtash, and to show, you know, how we came to meet and the kind of respect that you have in my eyes for having independently investigated things since I knew you, since before I met you. Welcome to the studio, Mehrtash.
Wade, thank you so much. As you know, the feeling is mutual, and I'm so impressed with everything that you're doing on this end. And as always, I'm grateful to have this time to explore with you religious teachings, ethical principles, and to consider how we might apply some of these teachings and principles to some of our current circumstances.
And in terms of your specific background, you basically present yourself as a researcher. How long have you been dedicating a large portion of your time to just research?
It's been basically, I would say, probably starting from the COVID years until now. And so I would say, what is that, about 5 years or so, looking into different journalistic trends, learning about independent media as distinguished from corporate or legacy media, let's say, looking into historical circumstances that led us to where we are today. And so that's been a deep interest of mine at this point in my life, last 5 years.
And you're about to mention something about Baha'u'lláh before I ask that.
Yes. Baha'u'lláh said that it is incumbent upon every man of insight and understanding to strive to translate that which hath been written into reality and action. Translate religious principles, ethical principles into reality and action. Apply spiritual teachings in material life. And so, well, what is going on in the world these days? What situations are signaling that there is a need for a renewal of ethics and morals? In the context of current events and news coverage, and in the context of the relationships connecting the individual, the community, and institutions, one of the trends that I've been monitoring is related to the freedom of belief, the freedom of expression. Related to that, it appears to me, there is a totalitarian trend that is gathering strength in lockstep throughout much of the world. Especially noticeable, I would say, in Western countries where we might have assumed that freedom of belief and freedom of expression are a given or a foregone conclusion. In a previous stage of my life, I would have assumed that the US Constitution put us historically in a new place with regard to protections of belief and assembly and expression, that we weren't going back to the despotic behavior of the past before that, that other countries might also be on this trajectory inspired by our Constitution. But in recent years, I have noticed serious efforts to censor speech on certain topics to prevent the authentic grassroots mobilizing of citizens in places like Brazil, Canada, the United States, Ireland, the United Kingdom, the European Union, New Zealand, Australia, and more. South Korea's president in November delivered a speech to police and civil officials there. He said that hate speech and misinformation spread on social media, and that these must be considered a crime that goes beyond the limits of the freedom of expression and must be severely punished because these things are a threat to democracy. And he is not alone. He is echoing what top politicians in so many other Western countries have said, the ones I mentioned a minute ago. And so just a minor tangent here. There has also been in many places an effort to condition populations to accept the notion that when it comes to certain subjects, people should trust and rely on experts, authorities, official pronouncements, and people should forego inquiry, investigation, questioning, demanding evidence, and debate. This message was noticeable coming from governments and media during the COVID years. Let's compare this trend towards censorship, current events to discourage or penalize free expression, to prevent ordinary people from sharing their views. Compare these behaviors with the teachings of the Baha'i faith, which talks about how freedom of belief and freedom of expression is conducive to progress. Shoghi Effendi, the head of the Baha'i faith from 1921 to 1957, said, "Let us remember that at the very root of the cause lies the principle of the undoubted right of the individual to self-expression, his freedom to declare his conscience and set forth his views." Abdu'l Bahá, who was the head of the Baha'i faith from 1892 to 1921, said, "Just as in the world of politics, there is need for free thought, likewise, in the world of religion, there should be the right of unrestricted individual belief. Consider what a vast difference exists between modern democracy and the old forms of despotism. Under an autocratic government, the opinions of men are not free, and development is stifled. Whereas in democracy, because thought and speech are not restricted, the greatest progress is witnessed. It is likewise true in the world of religion. When free,
you're still reading right now from the words of the Guardian, correct?
This is the words of Abdu'l Bahá, correct?
Well, okay, go ahead. Sorry.
When freedom of conscience, liberty of thought, and right of speech prevail, that is to say, when every man, according to his own idealization, may give expression to his beliefs, development and growth are inevitable. So, in free societies, there is a contest between different ideas. People evaluate what they are hearing. They respond to each other. The conversation evolves and matures, and people identify the valuable concepts or ideas that emerge from this examination. When ideas are stifled, when speech is censored, we are left with whatever narrative has been promoted by the powerful and wealthy factions that possess the resources to control thought. This is totalitarian. And when I look closely, I notice this is on display today. What's more, various powerful entities are working in concert with one another to impose and reinforce totalitarian trends. This top-down control of individuals and communities. I'm seeing totalitarian signals from national or state governments, global level organizations, even local institutions like.
May I pause you for a moment? Don't lose your place, but I want to take a half step back and unpack a couple of things.
Sure.
The Baha'i faith is completely nonpartisan. We do not get involved in politics. We don't support the party on the right, the party on the left, the movement on the left, the movement on the right. We independently investigate. And I want to come back to something I said earlier, that the Universal House of Justice on the Baha'i faith has specifically sent letters out on the issue of climate change and COVID. And in both of those letters, they mention that Baha'is and the institutions of the Baha'i faith may engage in these topics, and that certain institutions of the Baha'i faith may even express certain views. But they stipulate that the Baha'is are under no obligation to conform to those views on those topics, because they are not derived directly from the writings. That is through independent investigation into science as to exactly how climate change is or isn't unfolding and what its causes are, as to how effective vaccines are in this, that, or the other application into this, that, or the other population or age group or situation, whatever. It's complicated. And as the institutions of the Baha'i faith begin to express themselves with various views, the Baha'is themselves are under no obligation to conform to those views, period. No obligation. In other words, independent. So all of this flows directly from the words of Bahá'u'lláh, actually, and I'm going to read the second hidden word. O son of spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. I'm going on a slight tangent here. In the letter, the 2002 letter from the Universal House of Justice to the world's religious leaders, they talk about how some of the teachings of Baha'u'lláh, particularly the social teachings, have been adopted by the world. Teachings on the equality of men and women, teachings against extreme forms of nationalism in favor of viewing ourselves as a global community, a global society, one race, one planet, that view of oneness, and then views on racial prejudice. And they say in that letter that these three challenges, problems, opportunities have been fully adopted by the world as it exists today. They say especially so on the topic of racism, that you can't belong to any civilized society today and express racist views without repercussions. Which is why, to your point about hate speech, why the world is acting now aggressively to squelch and censor what they call hate speech, exactly because they have adopted an understanding of these teachings. And so I pause there and bring that in because this says the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. And we even have a term for it now. It's called social justice. It turn not away therefrom, from justice, if thou desirest me, and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. God confides in us, and this is the second hidden word. He confides in us based on the first hidden word, which is to possess a pure, kindly, and radiant heart, that thine may be a sovereignty, ancient, imperishable, and everlasting. We filter our thoughts, our beliefs, our views through the word of God, or we use the word of God to filter our beliefs through, and they come out purer, cleaner, better. And we focus on justice. But then he says, by its aid, justice, true justice, thou shalt see through thine own eyes and not through the eyes of another, and shall know of thine own knowledge and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness, set it then before thine eyes. Now, in that context, this move towards totalitarian governments, I want to highlight that politically, we might be fixated on an individual, a strong personality. We see the word Hitler being flung around all over the place today, labeling people with the name of Hitler as a symbol of that kind of strong individual, or Mussolini, right? But we could also use Stalin and Pol Pot, because the real authoritarian regimes of the last 200 years have not been in the West. Right? What you're saying now is that this trend is emerging in the West, but all of this is to unpack a perspective that says yes, we might fear certain individuals, certain prominent individuals and what they say or do. But you're talking about something much broader, much more systemic that began decades ago, many decades ago, and is pervasive throughout the institutions and not contingent upon any one individual.
That's correct. Yeah, and it's, you know, I think people can look at, I mean, humanity to a certain extent needs to, you know, organize some of its affairs through government. People can have different perspectives on that. Some people can look at government and say, you know, I have kind of God-given rights and government helps protect those. Or someone can have a different perspective and believe that my rights are given to me by the government. And when we tip into that direction, that becomes a dangerous thing, you know. So to put it in, you know, that into context of real life examples, you know, if you go in your local area to your district school board meeting, or if you go to your county council meeting and you notice that you are given such a brief amount of time to express yourself as to, you know, effectively thwart democratic processes, if you see that people are being prevented to speak in these places, some people might just think, well, that's the government and I'm just an individual, and institutions have power. And so that's just how it is, and I have to content myself with that. And I think another way to look at it is, you know, how important it is for the individual to exercise initiative and to attempt to make a difference, and to kind of encourage, you know, free speech, the expression of beliefs.
Dare we say minority views?
Yeah, minority views, you know, consultation, rather than preventing voices from speaking. And so I can, you know, share with you more after the break about, you know, kind of specific things I'm seeing that demonstrate collusion between even different governments to censor citizens, why we should be aware of that and why that should concern us.
Thank you for giving the segue into the break, because that's perfect timing. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. We'll be having more of Mehrtash Olson on the independent investigation of reality here on Created in the Image of God.
They said information would set us free. But what if it became our leash? In an age where media, power, and profit shape the very truth we see, Mehrtash Olson invites us to look deeper, to question the systems that trade freedom for control, and to remember that discernment is sacred. Freedom for sale, at Created in the Image of God.
Welcome back to the third installment of Mehrtash Olson on Created in the Image of God, talking about the independent investigation of reality. A little pre-announcement. There will be one more in this series, and then Mehrtash will be rolling out an educational program on a different platform that we're working with. More about that at the end. I want to tee this next segment up with a historical figure, David, King David. Yes, that King David, the King David that established a throne which Jesus would sit on at his return, the throne of King David. This is biblical prophecy. What's fascinating in this context is Samuel, the divinely appointed judge of Israel, who was the spiritual guide and leader, came to God and said, the people now want a king. What should I do? And God said, they have not rejected you, Samuel. They have rejected me, that I should not rule over them. Give them a king, but warn them this is what's going to happen if you have a king. Now, this is fascinating in light of the recent No Kings movement here in the US. So Samuel went and told the people, you don't want a king. if you have a king, he's going to do this, that, and the other thing, and you won't like it. And they said, oh, but we do want a king. We want to be like the nations around us. So Samuel went and anointed King Saul. And King Saul was humble at the beginning. And God worked mightily through him to conquer their enemies and build a great nation. But King Saul lost sight of where the power came from. He began to believe in his own might and power because he was actually a big guy, strong guy, a great military leader, had a lot of talents and abilities that were nascent that God saw. And he lost sight of the fact that it was all God. So then God tells Samuel to go anoint David as the next king of Israel, while Saul was still king. In Saul's eyes, this amounted to treason because he saw himself as being above the law of God, above Samuel. He began to believe Samuel was a treasonous figure who was now forming an insurrection, even though God had anointed David as the next king. Now, this is interesting from a number of perspectives because God sets up the kings and takes them down. He says that very clearly. I am the one who sets up a king and takes them down. And we're told to submit to the authorities that exist. So God does what he does for purposes known to him. And our lot is to submit to the rule of law and authority and trust in God. And he says that Baha'u'lláh says, except to speak well of them, make no mention of the kings. And this is something that Baha'is might sometimes be tempted to violate, but should never violate the words of Baha'u'lláh. Except to speak well of them, make no mention of the kings. However, talking generally about policies and trends is what we're doing here. But the other thing I wanted to mention is just this sort of interesting situation where Saul was still king. God had already said, this is what's coming next, and forced David to submit to Saul's authority, even while he was waiting for God to elevate him as king. And this is a fascinating story with many, many twists and turns. You could spend a lot of time studying this story and asking God for guidance in an effort to help us understand what's going on the planet today, because God is in charge. He has everything under control. Things are unfolding the way he wants. We should willingly submit to his will, but with an open mind and a heart, and questioning why, how, what, where, when, this independent investigation of reality. Because what this represents, David and Saul, is progressive revelation of God, progressive movement towards a better, improved system, but also, interestingly, simultaneously, the forces of integration and disintegration happening side by side. I just wanted to put that context out there as we look at the last 100, 200 years of unfolding civilization. And especially interesting is this fourth estate of journalism and newspapers and reporting to give us, as Baha'u'lláh says, a mirror to the world. A mirror to the world, so that we can look and see ourselves and others in this independent estate. I just wanted to tee up this way, Mehrtash, as you jump into this.
Sure. And I'll continue with this thought about how it's actually conducive to the progress of society to have freedom of belief, freedom of expression. And so it's important for us to encourage our communities, our institutions, to strive to emulate that standard. And it's important for us to see when they deviate from that standard, and not to kind of remain in aloofness or ignorance or indifference. So I wanted to mention an example of, in recent years, kind of the teaming up of, in this case, the United States and the United Kingdom government in censoring speech. And so just to back up for a second, in 1948, the US Congress passed a law. It was called the Smith-Mundt Act. And this allowed the US government to promote American ideals abroad, propaganda, while forbidding our own government from using that same manipulation on our own citizens. So the State Department, the CIA could produce media for foreign audiences, but we're not supposed to use this kind of material for US citizens. Americans were supposed to get their information from a free press. not the government's PR machine. So now, just to be clear, we do know that various U.S. intelligence agencies did manipulate U.S. news outlets and citizens of our country over the decades. Those were at the time secretive efforts. But in 2013, the Congress withdrew from American citizens even the official protections against propaganda. They withdrew the protection of the Smith-Mundt Act. From the perspective of government, it is now perfectly legal for the CIA and other institutions to propagandize American citizens. The so-called Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012 accomplished this. So the US government now freely directs its information operations, or propaganda, at the American public. The government has built an entire infrastructure for managing domestic narratives. The Global Engagement Center inside the State Department began funding counter-disinformation campaigns at home. They created the Disinformation Governance Board. There might be a listener out there that remembers Nina Jankowicz was appointed chief of the board. She became infamous for looking into a video camera, singing lyrics about misinformation to a Mary Poppins tune, and then posting this video clip on social media. So the video clip went viral. It alarmed a lot of people. It kind of this flippant, gleeful idea of censoring people. This drew lots of criticism, and the Disinformation Governance Board got too much scrutiny and was terminated. But the board's effort to propagandize people didn't stop. Mike Benz, who is a geopolitical analyst, he uncovered that when that board was terminated, Nina Jankowicz went straight to London. She registered as a foreign agent for the British Crown, effectively. She worked at a USAID-funded, London-based censorship unit called the Center for Information Resilience to psychologically inoculate citizens against supposed misinformation online, or in plain speak, to control the narrative. So this kind of collusion involving various governments is routine. For instance, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United States, the United Kingdom, the major English-speaking countries of the world, have collaborated closely on gathering and sharing intelligence since World War II. They share information and resources with each other to monitor communications and other data. Historically, the purpose of this was for national security. This alliance is known as the Five Eyes, if you've heard that term. However, over time, the alliance has expanded its scope to include controversial surveillance programs targeting citizens. This was revealed by leaks like those from Edward Snowden. Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky recently introduced a bill to repeal the 2013 law to overturn the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act in order to once again make domestic propaganda officially illegal. We'll see what happens. Sometimes, good law-abiding people say, why should I be concerned that the government is monitoring speech? I don't engage in hate speech or inflammatory speech. I have no worries for myself. Let the government listen. I'm concerned about radicals. I'm glad that the government is spying on citizens in order to zero in on inflammatory speech, hate speech, find out how to stop hate crimes or terrorism or whatever. So I'd like to talk a little bit more about the importance of free speech. When I look closely, I notice that practicing free speech and questioning authority are at this time characterized in much of the press as controversial or irresponsible behaviors. So Wade, I'm going to ask a multiple choice question. You can answer or not. The audience can answer as they're listening. Last year, 10,000 citizens were arrested for their social media posts in which country? A, China, B, Russia, C, North Korea, D, the United Kingdom. So 10,000 arrests were made in the United Kingdom last year for social media posts that the government did not agree with, not in so-called communist countries or a dictatorship.
Well, allow me though to maybe center this discussion. If we want to see where this trend ends up, then go look at those other countries, right? So if arrests are not being made in those countries, it's because censorship is already largely complete. Dissidents are in jail or dead. So I love the sort of sensationalism of this is happening in the UK. But what I don't like is the implication that the West is worse than these autocratic governments. You follow me? In other words, instead, we are following in their footsteps. They were the leaders. They were the leaders in censorship. The methods were pioneered and perfected in some of those countries. In the US, perhaps perfected in other ways, and in the Western countries, perfected in other ways, because freedom does allow you to be more successful as a nation in the long term, right? But I don't want the characterization that the West is worse in these things than the Soviet Union, China. You follow me? Rather, we are following in their footsteps now. Is that fair?
That's fair. We don't want to end up there. We want to course correct now.
Exactly.
So, to notice now what is happening and to understand
because the enemies of the US use this and many other facts to mirror back to us that we are more evil than they are, as part of a campaign to destroy the bastion of freedom, which is also destroying itself through these methods that you're outlining. So it's fifth generation warfare with our enemies and also within.
Yes. Yeah, so let's look at this idea of malinformation, which got these 10,000 people arrested for social media posts in the United Kingdom last year. Everybody's heard of misinformation. That's when I ignorantly say something inaccurate unintentionally. It could mislead people. It's misinformation. You've heard of disinformation. That's when I spread a lie on purpose. Some people might be deceived, and that was my intention if I'm spreading disinformation. More recently, a new phrase was coined.
That's reassuring, because I was accused of spreading misinformation. At least I wasn't accused of spreading disinformation or malinformation. That's encouraging. Anyway, go ahead.
Good. Yeah, so this is a new phrase, this malinformation. So malinformation is when I say something factually correct, not misleading, not disinformation. But malinformation is often inconvenient to some influential faction. And now the power apparatus moves in to retaliate against the truth teller. Malinformation is the term they give to truthful but inconvenient information. So 10,000 people arrested in the UK last year, basically for malinformation, true stuff that the government wanted to censor for one reason or another. So the sharing of truthful information is under steady assault across the world today because it risks upending narratives that ruling powers or vested interests strive carefully to cultivate. That is why you will witness the principles of free speech and questioning authority being demonized sometimes in the media. And we'll notice efforts to censor certain topics or certain voices. And of course, sadly, many citizens tolerate and even endorse this policing of speech because propaganda has convinced them that censoring and marginalizing certain voices or groups or topics is warranted. And once again, just juxtapose that with what Abdu'l Bahá said earlier and Shoghi Effendi about how important it is for the individual to be able to express themselves. So when institutions or media label speech with terms such as misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, you have to be careful. These terms are often used not in a sincere way, but instead to smear truth tellers and to stop inconvenient speech that bothers power centers. A real life example that I had mentioned once in conversation with you, Wade, was that early in the COVID era, Jay Bhattacharya, a Stanford professor, joined with some colleagues to propose a strategy of focused protection for vulnerable people, such as the elderly or the chronically ill, while allowing the rest of the population to live normally and to achieve, herd immunity, and opposing the idea of widespread lockdowns and the closing of schools, say. And this view was considered or portrayed as contrarian in media coverage at the time. It led to accusations from some media outlets that Bhattacharya was spreading false information. To his credit, Bhattacharya did not back down from that debate, despite the media smears characterizing him as being part of some fringe minority outside of the so-called scientific consensus. So in one public discussion that I saw, Bhattacharya highlighted the historical importance of scientific dissent, citing the example of Francis Kelsey, a U.S. Food and Drug Administration scientist. The story of Dr. Kelsey is that in 1960, the William S. Merrill Company proposed the use of the drug thalidomide for pregnant women to combat morning sickness. At the FDA, Dr. Kelsey was assigned to review the application. She was known for her meticulous approach. She noticed that the application lacked adequate evidence regarding the drug safety, despite being pressured by the Merrill Company, to quickly approve the drug for use in the U.S. Dr. Kelsey did not back down. And thank God for that, because it was later learned that thalidomide was linked to birth defects. So Dr. Kelsey's efforts helped save countless American babies from the effects of thalidomide. And it also led...
But this was used in other countries, and many babies were born without limbs.
Yes, it's terrible. And but her standing up also led to significant reforms in drug regulation in the U.S. And so as a consequence of all of that, she was awarded the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service by President John F. Kennedy. Freedom and liberty, encouraging investigation, encouraging free speech, these things build up society. By contrast, when you have heavy institutional control, powerful vested interests, propaganda, these things might lead to the enrichment of a particular sector or faction, but they also cause errors and destruction. You can't...
Let's go ahead and pause there, if this is a good time to pause and go to a commercial break. But I want to conclude this segment with a famous poem that many of our younger listeners may not have ever heard. The poem was originally in German, Als sie kamen, habe ich geschwiegen. I want to preface it, though, by going back to this whole Bhattacharya. Guess what? In Sweden, you're wearing a blue and yellow shirt. my name, Franson Olson, we're Swedes. We're Swedish heritage. Sweden took a different route. They followed the recommendations, maybe not directly, but with the same approach advocated by Dr. Bhattacharya. And guess what? Swedish society didn't implode in the long run. I don't know the exact data, but their statistics were, equal or better than what happened elsewhere around COVID without all of the debilitating effects of locking down the entire country. So that's worth going in and independently investigating, because there was an instance of doing it differently. But I want to conclude this segment with this poem, First They Came. Now, this is about the Holocaust, which those spreading malinformation, disinformation, and misinformation today are denying ever happened, denying that 6 million Jews were brutally murdered in various ways over the course of the pogroms. That started in Russia, frankly, but spread throughout Europe, and then under Hitler had their fruition in the concentration camps and the horrors of World War II. And I have visited those. I have visited Dachau multiple times during my 10 years in Germany to see the reality and the horror, long before there was AI and Photoshop, to see the actual footage of what happened and see the piles of shoes and teeth and just the horrors of what was the Holocaust. First, they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. Today's targets might be different. We might not be targeting the communists today. It might be the communists targeting other people. We might not be targeting the socialists today. It might be the socialists targeting. This is a human tendency. Whoever's in charge, whoever's in power, they don't want to relinquish it. You've heard the phrase, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This independent investigation is a safeguard, among other things. We'll be right back with more of Mehrtash Olson. Don't go anywhere.
What if everything you thought about healing was missing one vital piece? 7 generations of doctors, one man who took a different path. Betty Carmichael never went to med school, but he discovered something that science can't always explain. A spiritual process with the power to heal. Inside one of the nation's toughest recovery centers, he tested a 3-step spiritual method to address the real root of suffering, what he calls the prayer of freedom. An unexpected result happened. Nearly 90% of participants walked away healed in under a week. Now he's sharing this powerful process with the world, one that works regardless of religion or belief. Discover the prayer of freedom and unlock the life you were meant to live.
Welcome back to the third and final segment of the third installment of Mehrtash Olson. Over to you, Mehrtash.
So continuing with the kind of theme of you can't promote the true prosperity of humanity through coercion and control and partisanship. You need freedom of thought, freedom of action, freedom of speech. Many places in the West appear to be on their way to losing free speech. In the EU and UK, there are legal means being put into place to penalize, to criminalize speech. Say the wrong thing, go to jail. In America, look what happened during COVID when people's social media accounts were taken down because they had an opinion that the power apparatus wanted to silence. Look what happened in Canada to the Freedom Convoy truckers who assembled in Ottawa to protest, and even to the supporters of those truckers whose financial accounts were frozen. Where is this all coming from? So bear with me for a moment. Earlier in the series of conversations between Wade and myself, I mentioned the investigations by reporters like Glenn Greenwald, who have documented that many former spies are now in the internet age working for the popular technology companies like Facebook and Google. Before that, for many, many decades now, you might know that many of the so-called experts or pundits or sources employed by news organizations had previously held careers in the intelligence community. Glenn Greenwald, the investigative reporter, explains that the only major American center of power that employs more ex-US security state operatives than corporate media is big tech. So Greenwald hosts a show called System Update. He concluded a 2023 episode by speaking about the power apparatus in this way. He said, this is why they're so obsessed with destroying the few outposts of independent media, the few places they cannot control, because without those, they really do have a fully closed information system. And a fully closed information system is the hallmark of totalitarianism. If you can control how people think, if you can control how people think and prevent them from hearing dissent, you can control all of their actions, because their actions are based in what their thoughts are. And if you can control their thoughts, you don't even need to control their actions. And that is the system that is being created. So we don't exist currently under a spiritual paradigm where ethics and morality inspire the incentive structures that guide the actions of groups and institutions. We exist under a materialistic paradigm that generates a culture of contest, a struggle for power, partisanship, sectarianism, the elevation of profit over virtue, of profit at all costs, a corrupted system of incentives, a small number of extremely wealthy people, a diminishing middle class, many poor people, and generally not a promising forecast for the majority of humanity. The advancement of society will not come from government, I don't think. It will not come from materialistic corporations. If people do not work to strengthen ethics, to establish a new moral framework, to promote individual spiritual transformation, then we are left with the incentives and impulses of this outworn current paradigm, a contest for power.
Well, to me, what's almost most disturbing about this is, go on a slight tangent very quickly. When I was kidnapped and taken to Sweden, I learned that in Sweden, they had laws protecting children. Advertising to children was strictly forbidden. Not so in the United States, where the television was the babysitter and kids would sit in front of the TV and drink in all this marketing targeted at them, where entertainment was really advertisements for products. This has become more and more obvious with things like the Transformers, and every movie is just a way to get the kids wanting the characters that they can get at a Happy Meal at McDonald's and buy the toys and the games and watch the movies. It's all, it's my son, who's pretty smart and in freshman in high school, was like desperate to go try the new Burger King meals, the SpongeBob meal, right? It's all marketing. We grew up being marketed with the most sophisticated neural programming tools available to modern science, with literally billions of dollars of research going in how to influence us. And here's the scary part. Our spiritual values can be co-opted and hacked into. Those principles that I spoke about earlier, about oneness, unity, equality of the sexes, eliminating racial prejudices, extreme nationalism, they can be hacked into by we have malinformation, let's call it mal-virtue signaling. Mm-hmm. Virtue signaling around some of these spiritual principles with evil intent to hack into our value system and get us to align with their agenda. That to me is like the most disturbing, because Baha'is in particular, Christians as well, the religious people of this world, are supposed to be the leaven that are transforming the world and bringing about the kingdom of God. And this is true of all religions. We are to be the leaven. We are to be transforming the nature and the spirit of those first two hidden words, purity of heart with a focus on justice. But there are those who see that. The world has adopted those views after Baha'u'lláh came in particular, and those sympathies can be hacked into. To me, that's very disturbing. And I frankly, I see it happening all around me. To really discern, to really truly focus on justice God's way, so that he may confide in us and guide us through that still small voice to the independent investigation of reality.
There has been a lot of behavioral modification going on, and when you look under the hood, it's alarming. As you're talking about, you peel back the layers. One of the main things that has been reinforced to me in my examination of the news cycle is how important it is to remain skeptical, to remain neutral when observing current events. Remember to think of unity first in any controversy, because so much of the news cycle is sensational, it's controversial, it's divisive, and we can easily get sucked in to various narratives. I just want to, maybe I should close out, the next couple minutes. I'd like to say something about unusual about this whole Charlie Kirk incident, the shooting of Charlie Kirk. I want to talk about the circulation of the video footage from his murder. This observation was brought to my attention by Cheyenne Hunt, who is the executive director of Gen Z for Change. So Cheyenne Hunt pointed out that an organization called the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism has been active since 2017. So that forum, it includes 24 tech companies, you can name all of them as members, plus governments, civil society, academia. These different entities collaborate ostensibly to combat online terrorist content. The forum members, they share data with each other about content that violates community guidelines in order for the various members to be able to move in unison across their different platforms and take down anything that is deemed to be dangerous or inappropriate. There's a systematic way for worrisome content to be automatically taken down everywhere. And this has been in effect since like 2017. So for instance, if the Taliban is going to behead someone, they're going to video that and try to spread the video clip on social media and the internet. This global internet forum would immediately prevent the content from getting around, apply their various filters and algorithms, and take it down across all these sites, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, you name it. Why did this not happen with the Charlie Kirk assassination footage? Why was the graphic video footage of that incident available on every platform? To this day, I think you can still find video clips of that shooting, which occurred way back on September 10. Apparently, all of these tech platforms can adjust their algorithms to instantly take down current and future uploads of this shooting. What would be the reason that video clips documenting such an alarming event could be permitted to continue to circulate? So Cheyenne Hunt says it seems that some entity wanted you to see the footage of that shooting over and over, as many times as you wanted. What was the reason for this? Was the Charlie Kirk shooting footage permitted to circulate on these platforms to keep users online so that apps could serve up more advertisements to keep making money? Was this footage allowed to circulate in order to generate controversy and contention so that political operators could use this controversy as justification to go after their ideological enemies? Was this footage permitted to circulate in order to foment culture wars between groups and individuals with divergent viewpoints? Was this terrible footage being used as a decoy when our minds become engrossed by what is being served up by the 24-hour news cycles? like controversies related to a public figure, such as Charlie Kirk, we are likely less cognizant of some other event or reality that perhaps powerful interests might be trying to conceal. I don't know that we have enough evidence yet to figure out why this forum, this conglomerate of corporations and government, allowed the Charlie Kirk shooting footage to continue to circulate for months or weeks or even merely days, when they had the ability to take down that content immediately. But for some reason, this was permitted to happen against all norms and rules and explicit agreements that ordinarily would have prevented something like this. Remember what reporters like Glenn Greenwald and others have documented, that the industry which hires the largest number of former intelligence agents is big tech, which created the global internet forum to counter terrorism, the forum that takes down objectionable material from the internet, which for reasons unknown to me declined to take down the Charlie Kirk footage. There are people who want to debate whether it was a lone gunman that killed Charlie Kirk or whether a group collaborated to do it. There are people that argue whether Charlie Kirk was doing important work. Whether or not we are concerned about this subject, we shouldn't let ourselves get drawn into arguments or controversies about this. Stay neutral, stay skeptical. We don't always know why things happen. There is a battle for the mind of the citizen. Some people refer to it as fifth generation warfare. NATO refers to it as cognitive warfare. We have to remember on a daily basis to think of unity first. The Baha'i faith says unity is the most pressing necessity of the modern age. A house divided against itself cannot stand. And we must remain neutral and skeptical of everything that is presented to us, because there are a lot of destabilizing things that are presented to us through the media and technology platforms that are damaging to our spirit and to our connection with others. The true prosperity of humankind is built on virtue. Baha'u'lláh said, truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. So find sources of information that strive to tell you the truth. If you look at the top of my Twitter page, you'll see a list of reputable independent journalists that are accountable only to their readers, not to corporations and government. So that's what I'd like to end on.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I want to introduce one idea here at the end. I know we're out of time really, but historically, traditionally, and in all religions, including the Baha'i faith, there's reference to a being called Satan. And lest the Baha'is recoil in horror at me bringing this up, Baha'u'lláh, Abdu'l Bahá, the Guardian, Muhammad, they all refer to Satan in ways that indicate we should consider that he's real. In other words, Satan as a metaphor, as an idea, is used in order to, in my opinion on this topic, allow us to externalize and objectify that evil. Because we can go down so many conspiratorial rabbit holes and try to figure out who are the who's pulling the strings, who's the evil cabal. But it's hard, right? Because there's false flag operations. It's a lie within a lie within a lie within a lie, and it's an onion that you can keep peeling at. And whatever, to your point about being objective, look for reputable sources, remain skeptical. Whatever layer of onion you've peeled off, you can get stuck there and believe that. But that could be a lie as well. And that's why Jesus refers to Satan as the father of liars, right? The whisperer in the Garden of Eden who said, oh, God doesn't want you to eat of that fruit because in the day you eat thereof, you will become like God, knowing good and evil. And so see how he inverted this idea? God created us in his image. That's the title of this show. God created us in his image. He wants us to know good and evil. Paul the apostle said strong meat belongs to those who by reason of use have exercised their senses to discern good and evil. I could unpack that for the Christians theologically as to how that flipped. In simple terms, Christ is the second Adam. He undid everything. He finished it. We reached a stage of new maturity in Jesus. The point I'm making here is yes, be very careful going down into those conspiratorial rabbit holes. Just be a seeker. Don't believe you've uncovered necessarily the truth. I try to increasingly operate under what I call my working hypothesis. It appears right now that this may be the case, but not to become attached to those ideas and to begin spouting those ideas specifically as truth, right? To be a researcher as you are, Mehrtash, a seeker, each one of us seeking to see with our own eyes, not necessarily trying to convince everybody else of our viewpoint. We're all in this together. Unity is the key, and anything that tends to divide or point, at one people, one group as the source and the cause is counter to that purpose. That's why this sort of metaphor, this idea of Satan, is actually useful, which is why, in my opinion, Baha'u'lláh, Abdu'l Bahá, the Guardian, all referred to Satan in a verbal context as though there really is a Satan, because it's a helpful, useful metaphor to externalize and objectify these things and not be so attached to it. That's just my sort of opinion, open for discussion on that for sure. Mehrtash, we're out of time. Any final last words?
No, been wonderful talking to you, Wade. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Awesome. And there's one more session of this coming. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to be helping Mehrtash launch an educational series on something called Planksip. More on that the next time Mehrtash appears, which will be January. I'm in December. So Mehrtash will appear again for his fourth and final installment of this series on creating the image of God on it's in January 25th, Sunday, January 25th. Stay tuned for the sneak peek of next week's show. And remember, you are created in the image of God, and God loves his creation. We'll see you next week.
The birth of Jesus was heralded by angels praising God, saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." Yet across history, faith has just as often become a fault line. Jesus himself warned that belief could bring not peace, but a sword of division. We can see that sword's edge in our headlines, in our streets, and too often in the Holy Land itself. Religious unity may well be the last great challenge for our species, a task as profound as any scientific breakthrough, as urgent as any peace treaty. The prophets gave us a picture of what that unity could look like. The lion lying down with the lamb, the Lion of Judah and the Lamb of God, strength and vulnerability, justice and mercy, sharing the same field without fear. Nowhere is that struggle more visible than in Jerusalem, a city where synagogue, church, and mosque stand within earshot of one another. A city of scars and sanctuaries, where division is real, but so is the possibility of a different story. That possibility is what theologian Ellen Cherry calls a peace proposal between Judaism and Christianity. Not just an armistice between believers, but a way for the traditions themselves to share God, so that God's world can flourish, not languish. On December 23rd, host Wade Frenson sits down with Ellen Cherry to explore how that proposal might become reality. Because if we are all created in the image of God, then learning to make peace in God's name may be how we finally learn to make peace with one another.
Hey, welcome everybody. It's Wade Franson back with a sneak peek of next week's show. Next week on Creating the Image of God, December 28th, Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central. We will have David Langness, lifetime seeker, Baha'i of 56 years, editor of Bahá'íTeachings.org for over a decade, writer of thousands of articles, a number of them dealing with the topic of hell, which is what attracted me to having him in the studio, because we're going to dive deep into hell. So, David, what can people expect when they tune in next week to hear our talk, our discussion?
Oh, thanks, Wade. Thanks for having me. You know, hell has been used to scare children and other people for thousands of years, and I really am fascinated by the concept of hell. I want to try and unpack what it means in the Baha'i writings, and especially to understand it not as a place, not as some physical, torture chamber, but as a metaphor for something inside ourselves.
Well, and one of the things that we talked about was how to conquer hell, in a sense, right? Understanding what it really is and what the metaphor really means gives you a little bit of an edge as to what to do about it. And will we learn anything about that?
Yes, I hope so. We'll talk a little bit about character and the human self, the ego, what it means to attempt to transcend that ego, to leave the animal instincts that we're all born with behind, and to begin to develop the higher, more spiritual natures that we're destined to have.
Wonderful. So you can see why you're not going to want to miss next week on Created in the Image of God with David Langness, 7 a.m. Central Time, right here on Created in the Image of God. We'll see you there.